Your fiancé put something in your drink, the maid's toddler whispered. The billionaire wasn't ready for the truth. Hey, if you have ever felt invisible, this story will hit you differently. 3-year-old girl. A maid's daughter. Tiny hands. Innocent eyes. She couldn't even tie her own shoes yet. But she saw something that night that every adult in that mansion completely missed. The chandeliers were glowing. The champagne was flowing. 38-year-old billionaire Ethan Caldwell was celebrating his engagement to the most beautiful woman in the room, 28-year-old Vanessa Cole. Everyone was smiling. Everyone was clapping. Everything looked perfect. But just before Ethan lifted that glass to his lips, a tiny voice pulled at his sleeve. "Mister." He looked down. Those wide, serious toddler eyes looked straight up at him without blinking. Your fiancé put something in your drink. The entire room seemed to stop breathing. And what Ethan discovered next changed absolutely everything. Hey, beautiful people. Welcome back. If you're new here, I'm so glad you found this channel. Drop a comment right now and tell me, where in the world are you watching from tonight? I love seeing all your locations come in. And if stories like this move you, hit that subscribe button, because we drop emotional stories every single week that will stay with you long after the video ends. Now, stay with me until the very last second of this story. Because the final twist, I promise you, you will not see it coming. Let's get into it. Everything about that evening looked like a fairy tale. But fairy tales have always been hiding something dark underneath. The Caldwell estate sat on the edge of the city like a crown jewel. 12 bedrooms. Private lake. A grand ballroom with floors so polished you could see your reflection in them. Ethan Caldwell had built his empire from the ground up. Tech, real estate, investments, all before the age of 40. He was sharp, private, and fiercely self-made. But tonight, for the first time in years, Ethan had allowed himself to feel something softer. Tonight was his engagement party. The ballroom was filled with over 200 guests. Investors, celebrities, old family friends, and socialites in gowns that cost more than most people's monthly salaries. Crystal glasses clinked. A jazz quartet played in the corner. The scent of white roses floated through the air. Ethan stood near the grand staircase in a perfectly tailored black suit, a calm but genuine smile on his face. He wasn't a man who smiled easily. People who knew him well noticed it immediately. He looked happy, truly happy, and the reason for that happiness had her arm looped through his. Vanessa Cole, 28 years old, stunning in a deep emerald gown. Dark hair swept elegantly off her shoulders. She laughed at exactly the right moments, touched his arm at exactly the right moments, and looked at him with those amber eyes like he was the only man in the room. Ethan had met her 14 months ago at a charity gala. She was warm, intelligent, charming, and for a man as guarded as Ethan, she had somehow slipped past every wall he'd ever built, quietly, effortlessly, like she had always belonged there. He proposed 3 weeks ago. She said yes before he'd even finished the sentence. Tonight was the celebration. But was any of it real? At the far edge of the ballroom, past the catering tables, past the floral arrangements, near a side door that guests rarely noticed, stood a woman named Clara, 34 years old. Dark circles under her eyes. Her uniform was crisp and clean because she always made sure it was, no matter how tired she felt. Clara had worked in the Caldwell estate for 4 years. She was quiet, diligent, and invisible in the way that only the truly overlooked can be. And pressed against her leg, half hidden behind the folds of her apron, was her daughter, Lily, 3 years old. Big brown eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. A tiny yellow dress with a small white bow that Clara had ironed twice that morning. Lily wasn't supposed to be there. Staff children weren't permitted at events. But Clara's babysitter had cancelled at the last moment, and there was no one else. So Lily was there, tucked close to her mother, watching. Children at that age don't understand wealth. They don't see status or power. They don't know what $1 billion looks like or what it means. They only see what's real. And Lily's eyes that night were seeing something that nobody else was bothering to look at. She watched the beautiful lady in the green dress, the one everyone kept photographing, the one who laughed and sparkled, slip away from the crowd for a moment. Lily watched her walk to the drinks table when the attendant stepped away. Lily watched her reach into a small clutch purse. Lily watched her uncap something small and dark. And Lily watched her tip it, quickly, quietly, into a single crystal glass. Then the beautiful lady smiled, picked up that same glass, and carried it back across the ballroom floor, straight toward Ethan. What would you do if you were 3 years old and you saw something like that? Would you even know it was wrong? Lily didn't have words for what she felt. She just felt it. Somewhere in that small chest of hers, something tightened. She looked up at her mother. Clara was busy reorganizing a tray of appetizers, eyes down, completely unaware. Lily looked back across the room. The beautiful lady was handing the glass to the tall man in the black suit. He was smiling. He was about to drink. And Lily's tiny feet started moving before her mind had even caught up with them. Nobody notices a toddler at a billionaire's party. Until that toddler does something nobody expects. Lily crossed the ballroom floor alone. 3 years old. Barely reaching the elbows of the guests, she weaved between. No one looked down. No one moved out of her way. She was invisible. Just another shadow in a room full of glittering, self-important people. But she kept walking. Past the tall woman in the red gown who was laughing too loudly. Past the 2 men arguing quietly about stock margins. Past the waitstaff carrying trays of food that smelled warm and rich. She kept her eyes fixed on the man in the black suit. Ethan was just raising the crystal glass toward his lips. Someone nearby had proposed a toast, and the crowd was shifting closer, the moment building, when he felt something. Small tug. Just 2 tiny fingers, curled around the fabric of his jacket sleeve. He paused. He looked down. There was a little girl standing beside him. Enormous brown eyes staring straight up at him. That little yellow dress. Those small hands. A look on her face that was impossibly serious for someone her age. Ethan blinked. He was so caught off guard that for a moment, he completely forgot about the toast. "Hello," he said, almost amused. "Where did you come from?" Lily didn't answer that. She just kept looking at him with those steady, unblinking eyes. Then she leaned in, just slightly, like she had something very important and very private to say. And she whispered it. "Mister, your fiancé put something in your drink." The words were small, quiet, barely audible above the music and the crowd noise. But Ethan heard every single one of them. The glass stayed frozen halfway to his mouth. His eyes moved, involuntarily, to Vanessa, who was standing just a few feet away, laughing at something a guest had said, completely at ease, completely radiant. Then back down to the little girl. "What did you say?" he asked, his voice careful and low. Lily held his gaze without flinching. "She put something in it. From a little bottle. I saw." Ethan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. A man who had spent 20 years in cutthroat boardrooms knew how to keep his face still. He kept it still now. He set the glass down slowly on the tray of a passing waiter. Then he crouched down to Lily's eye level, something that clearly surprised her because her eyes went a little wider, and he said quietly, "What's your name?" "Lily. Lily." He said it carefully. "Do you know what you saw? Can you show me?" She nodded once, very solemnly. And that single nod from a 3-year-old girl quietly shattered the entire foundation of Ethan Caldwell's carefully constructed happiness. Have you ever had a moment where one small thing, one tiny detail, made you question everything you thought you knew? Clara appeared out of nowhere, breathless, horrified, her face drained of color. She had looked away for 90 seconds. 90 seconds, and Lily had crossed the entire ballroom. "Oh my God, Lily!" She scooped her daughter up instantly, pressing her close. "I am so sorry, Mr. Caldwell, I am so sorry. She knows she's not supposed to. I'll take her right away." "Stop." Ethan's voice was quiet but absolute. Clara froze. He stood up slowly and looked at her. His expression was unreadable, but there was something flickering behind his eyes, something Clara had never seen on his face in 4 years of working for him. It looked like barely controlled fear. "Did Lily say anything to you tonight? Before she came over here?" Clara shook her head, confused and frightened. "No, she's been with me all evening. She hasn't." "Why? What did she say? Did she bother you?" "Please, Mr. Caldwell, I'm so sorry." "She didn't bother me." He looked at Lily, who was now watching him calmly from her mother's arms. "She may have just saved my life," he said softly. Clara's breath caught. And across the room, Vanessa Cole finally noticed her fiancé wasn't where she'd left him. He turned. She saw him standing near the staff entrance, speaking quietly with the maid and her child. Something moved across Vanessa's perfect face. It was gone in an instant, replaced immediately by that warm, easy smile. But it had been there. And Ethan, who was watching her from across the room at that exact moment, had seen it. The billionaire had survived hostile takeovers, betrayals, and financial wars, but nothing had prepared him for this. Ethan made a decision in the next 60 seconds that would define the rest of his life. He didn't make a scene. He didn't confront Vanessa in the middle of his own engagement party with 200 witnesses watching. He was not that kind of man. Instead, he smiled, the way he always smiled in boardrooms when someone was lying to him, and he returned to his guests. He laughed. He toasted. He danced with Vanessa once, holding her close, feeling the warmth of her against him and searching every sensation for truth. She was perfect. She was always perfect. But now that perfection felt like a performance. And Ethan couldn't unfeel that. Quietly, during a moment when Vanessa was occupied with photographs, Ethan slipped away. He found his head of security, a former investigator named Marcus, and spoke to him in 4 sentences. Marcus retrieved the crystal glass from the waiter's tray before it was cleared. By midnight, the party was winding down. By 1 in the morning, the guests were gone. Vanessa had been kissed goodnight and sent home in the estate car. Ethan claimed a migraine, and the glass was already on its way to a private laboratory. Ethan sat alone in his study. The fire burned low. The house was quiet. He stared at nothing for a long time. What do you do when the person you love most becomes the person you're most afraid of? He thought about 14 months. He rewound every conversation, every dinner, every quiet night. He searched for signs he'd missed. Moments that should have felt wrong but didn't. He found too many. The results came back 41 hours later. Marcus placed a single printed page on Ethan's desk without speaking. Ethan read it once. Then he sat back in his chair and closed his eyes. The glass had contained traces of a sedative. Powerful, fast-acting, and largely untraceable after a few hours in the bloodstream. Not enough to kill, but more than enough to heavily incapacitate. Combined with alcohol, it would have left Ethan barely conscious within 20 minutes. The report sat on the desk between them like a grenade. "I need to know everything," Ethan said quietly. "Who she is, where she came from, what she needed me for." Marcus nodded. He'd already started. "There's something else," Marcus said. He hesitated, which was unusual for a man who was never uncertain. "I ran a preliminary background check the moment you told me last night." He placed a second page on the desk. "Vanessa Cole doesn't exist before 6 years ago." Ethan's eyes snapped to his. "No birth records that match. No educational history before a certain point. The biography she gave you, her childhood in Vermont, her parents, her degree, all of it fabricated." The fire crackled in the silence. So who is she? Ethan said. We're working on it. Marcus paused again. But there's a name that keeps appearing on the edges of the financial trail we're following. He pointed to the bottom of the page. Ethan read the name. His face went completely still. It was the name of a man who had been trying to destroy him for years. Rival. A former partner. Someone Ethan had trusted once, long ago, who had walked away from their company with nothing, and had never forgiven him for it. The name was Raymond Holt. The room was quiet, but inside Ethan's chest, something that felt like grief and rage arrived at exactly the same moment. He had been the target. The engagement, the romance, the entire 14 months. It had been a long game. Get close. Get the ring. And then, on the night of the engagement party, with 200 witnesses and a carefully timed incident, remove Ethan from the picture entirely. A sedated billionaire. Documents to sign. Power of attorney. Emergency clauses in the company structure. He'd seen those kinds of moves before, but never aimed at him. Never from someone sleeping next to him. He stood up from the desk. Walked to the window. The city glittered far below. And then, in the silence of that enormous house, a thought rose above all the others. A 3-year-old girl had seen what 200 adults had missed. He turned to Marcus. Clara's daughter. Lily. His voice was quieter now. Different. I want to know about them too. He thought Vanessa was the only secret in that mansion. He had no idea the truth was much closer than he imagined. Clara didn't sleep that night. She lay in her small staff quarters at the edge of the estate. A neat, modest room she'd kept spotlessly tidy for 4 years, and listened to Lily's soft breathing from the little bed beside her. She didn't know what Lily had said to Mr. Caldwell. She only knew that something had shifted in that ballroom. That the look on his face when he'd sent her away had not been anger, which she'd expected and prepared herself for, but something far more complicated. She held her breath for the next 2 days, waiting to be dismissed. Instead, on the morning of the 3rd day, there was a knock at her door. It was Marcus. Mr. Caldwell would like to speak with you, he said. Both of you. Clara picked Lily up, pressed her close, and followed him down the long corridor to Ethan's private study, a room she had cleaned dozens of times but never entered while he was in it. Ethan was standing near the window. He looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. There were papers spread across his desk and a second chair pulled close, a small chair. Clara noticed immediately that it was the right height for a child. He'd thought of that. She wasn't sure why that detail made her throat tighten. Please sit down, he said. They sat, Clara on the edge of her chair, Lily tucked into the small one beside her, quietly clutching the worn stuffed rabbit she'd carried since she was 18 months old. Ethan crouched down to Lily's level again. He seemed to do that naturally with her. This automatic gesture of making himself smaller. Lily, he said, do you remember what you told me at the party? Lily looked at him seriously. Then she nodded. Can you tell your mummy what you told me? Lily turned to Clara. Her voice was matter-of-fact in the way only very young children can be about devastating things. The pretty lady put a little bottle in the tall man's drink, she said. I watched her. She was sneaky. Clara's face went white. She looked at Ethan. He looked back at her steadily. The lab results confirmed it, he said quietly. Clara pressed a hand to her mouth. What would you do if you realized your child's innocent eyes had witnessed something that could have cost a man his life? Is she in trouble? Clara whispered. Lily, did she do something wrong? I need to know she's safe. She's not in trouble. Ethan's voice was gentle in a way that surprised her. She may have saved my life, Clara. I needed to tell you both that. The silence stretched. Clara's eyes filled, and she blinked hard, refusing to let it spill. Then Ethan said something she hadn't expected. I also want to know about you. Clara stiffened. Me. He picked up a folder from the desk. I had my team do some research. Routine, given everything. He paused. Your husband passed away 2 years ago. You've been raising Lily alone since she was 1 year old. You work 7 days a week. You've turned down every offered day off for 8 months. He set the folder down. Why? Clara was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was steady, but only just. Lily needs a specialist, she said. A hearing specialist. Her left ear. She lost most of the hearing on that side after an infection when she was 18 months. There's a procedure. He stopped. Started again. There's a procedure that could help her significantly. But it costs more than I'll earn in 3 years. Ethan looked at Lily. Lily was looking back at him with those enormous, serious eyes, completely unconcerned. The way children are when they don't yet understand the weight of what the adults around them are carrying. He thought about the fact that this child with compromised hearing had somehow caught the quiet, careful sound of a small bottle being opened and liquid being poured. He thought about the fact that she had crossed a crowded ballroom alone. He thought about the fact that she had looked up at a stranger and told him the truth without flinching. She heard it, he said quietly, almost to himself. Even with one ear. She heard it. Clara nodded, a tear finally escaping. She doesn't miss much. No, Ethan said softly. She doesn't. He looked at the little girl for a long moment. And something in his chest, something that had been locked behind boardrooms and billion-dollar decisions and 14 months of practiced betrayal, quietly cracked open. A house built on lies doesn't collapse slowly. It falls all at once. It took Marcus and his team 11 days to unravel the full truth of who Vanessa Cole really was. Her real name was Diana Reeves. 31 years old. Not 28. Born in a small town in Ohio, she'd grown up poor, brilliant, and deeply angry about both. She'd crossed paths with Raymond Holt, Ethan's enemy. 7 years ago, when she was working as a low-level financial analyst and he was already building his network of influence. Holt had seen something in her immediately. Beauty, intelligence, and a burning need to prove herself. He'd groomed her slowly, teaching her, shaping her, funding her transformation into Vanessa Cole. A carefully constructed persona built for a single purpose. Get close to Ethan Caldwell. Destroy him. The sedative that night was the beginning, not the end. The plan, once Ethan was incapacitated, was for Diana to access his private server using a device she'd hidden in the estate. Company files. Private communications. Enough to stage a hostile acquisition that Holt had been engineering for 2 years. The engagement, the ring, the romance had all been architecture. When Marcus laid out the full picture, Ethan sat with it for a long time. He didn't rage. He didn't break anything. He just sat very still in his chair and processed the specific surgical quality of how completely he had been deceived. Have you ever trusted someone so deeply that the betrayal didn't feel like anger? It felt like grief? That evening, he picked up the phone and called the woman he still knew as Vanessa. I've been thinking about us, he said. His voice was warm and hurried. 14 months of watching her perform had taught him exactly how to mirror it. She relaxed on the other end of the line. He could hear it. I want to meet, he said. Tomorrow. The estate. She agreed immediately. Course she did. What she didn't know was that Marcus had already coordinated with law enforcement. What she didn't know was that the device she'd hidden in the East Wing had already been found and catalogued. What she didn't know was that Raymond Holt's financial network had been quietly flagged by 3 separate regulatory bodies. Diana Reeves walked through the front doors of the Caldwell estate the following afternoon in a cream-colored coat, smiling, unhurried. Every inch Vanessa Cole. She made it as far as the main hallway. The moment the doors closed behind her, she understood. She looked at Ethan. He looked back at her. And for the first time he didn't try to hide what was in his eyes. The mask dropped. On both sides. "How long have you known?" she asked. Her voice had changed. The warmth was gone. What was left was something cooler, harder, and strangely more human. "Long enough," he said. She nodded slowly. Strange, bitter smile. "The maid's kid." Ethan didn't answer. She glanced around the hallway. At Marcus, at the two law enforcement officers standing quietly at the far end. Then she looked back at Ethan one last time. "For what it's worth," she said softly, and something complicated moved across her face. Something that almost looked like regret. "The first month was real." Ethan said nothing. She was escorted out. Holt's network collapsed within weeks. And the estate, which had been filled 2 weeks earlier with champagne and false laughter and 200 people watching a lie, became quiet again. But something had changed inside those walls. Something small and irreversible and good. He had everything money could build. But one small girl had shown him the one thing money never could. 3 weeks after Diana Reeves was escorted from the estate, Ethan Caldwell did something entirely unexpected. He called Clara into his study again. This time, Lily wasn't tucked nervously against her mother's side. She was sitting cross-legged on the floor in the hallway outside, carefully lining up a row of small pebbles she'd collected from the garden path, completely absorbed, completely unbothered by the grandeur surrounding her. Ethan watched her through the glass panel for a moment before Clara arrived. There was something about Lily that he couldn't stop turning over in his mind. Her certainty. She had crossed that ballroom alone, in the middle of a crowd of 200 strangers, to tug on the sleeve of a man she'd never met, because she had seen something wrong, and it had not occurred to her for even a second that it wasn't her place to say something. No calculation. No hesitation. No awareness of how small she was or how big the room was. Just, "This is wrong and someone needs to know." When did adults lose that? Ethan had wondered more than once in the weeks since. When did the world teach us that what we see doesn't count unless we're important enough to say it? Clara came in and sat down already braced. Ethan could see it in the careful way she held herself, the polite, practiced blankness she wore like armor. 4 years of being overlooked had taught her not to expect much. He slid an envelope across the desk. She looked at it. Didn't pick it up. "What is this?" she asked carefully. "Open it." She did. It was a single letter. On Caldwell Foundation letterhead. Short, clear, official. It confirmed that the Caldwell Foundation would be fully funding Lily's hearing procedure, including all preoperative consultations, the surgery itself, and postoperative care, at the specialist center in Boston that Clara had apparently researched thoroughly and printed information about and tucked into the back of a folder she kept under her bed. His team had found the folder. Clara read the letter once. Then she read it again. Her hand started shaking, very slightly but enough. "You don't have to," she started.